This is Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. I have a very special guest on the program today. I think you'll really enjoy. Bill Macfadyen is with me. Bill is the publisher and founder of NewsHawk here in Santa Barbara. He's a fascinating guy. He's built a great news business, and I think you'll really be interested in what he has to say. So stay tuned. Bill Macfadyen, The Good Life, is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you joined us today. I have a special guest with me. Bill Macfadyen is with me. Bill is the founder and publisher of NewsHawk here in Santa Barbara, which is a wonderful news service. And Bill is the co-chairman of the brand new Santa Barbara South Coast Chamber of Commerce, board member at Partners in Education here locally, and the Westmont College Foundation, among others. NewsHawk is a 24/7 news organization that Bill founded several years ago that we're going to talk about. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tell me just real quick, just for people to get to know you, just a little bit about your story, where you grew up and your family and that sort of thing.
My family actually is from Malibu, and since the 40s, and but I grew up all over the country. I went to high school in Birmingham, Alabama. Came back to California to go to Pepperdine, left Pepperdine to finish up my college at University of Houston, got my start in newspapers in Houston, and then, but since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to live in Santa Barbara, and so when I was in Houston at the Houston Post, which at the time was the 23rd largest daily newspaper in the country, and today it's out of business, but as soon as I had access to their stationery, I was bombarding the daily paper in Santa Barbara, begging them to hire me, and eventually they relented and against their better judgment.
What paper was that?
The daily newspaper here.
Okay, and so that's where you went to. That's how you got here.
Yes, in 1987.
Wow. And was news journalism always where you wanted to go?
No, actually, my goal was to play center field for the Dodgers. But it became apparent to me in high school that probably the only way I was ever going to patrol center field was as a security guard. So I had to do something else. Couldn't do math. So that's really leaves about journalism is about the only thing left. So
why did you found NewsHawk?
That's a really good question. So I had been at the daily newspaper for 15 years, and that was my dream job. I was the front page editor, news editor, and over the course of that period of time, I recruited the ideal copy desk. I had just put the last person in place when the New York Times sold it to a local owner in 2000. Sorry, the years all run together unless you're talking about Dodgers baseball trivia from the 70s and 80s. Anyway, I stayed on about 9 months into the new ownership and then resigned. And then the next year started a weekly newspaper, the South Coast Beacon, which to this day people in Santa Barbara revere. It's not uncommon for people to talk about it to me, but never made a dime. That thing was a financial disaster. And we shut that down in 2004, and I was looking for other publishing opportunities in 2005 and then into 2006. And then mid-year in 2006, the daily newspaper imploded. It was a really dramatic story for Santa Barbara. And then about 6 weeks later, the KEYT had a significant downsizing. So in about a 2-month period, all of a sudden, Santa Barbarans had no place to go for mainstream, everyday local news. And I knew that people were online looking for that kind of information and not being able to find it. But I didn't know if advertisers and businesses were at that point yet. So I went back to some of the Beacon advertisers, and it turned out they were very interested in that. So I was able to, I put together a business plan, was able to convince several advertisers to commit to a year, and then a few of them to prepay for a year, and that's how I got the seed funding to start NewsHawk, and we launched in October of 2007.
Wow, so it's been coming up on 13 years.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And how's it going? I mean, how
Piece of cake. Could not be easier.
You make it look so easy.
Yeah, it's so easy. It's been an interesting experience. It's the hardest I've ever worked. It's the most fun I've ever had, and the opportunity that we had. I mean, I got really lucky, and we hit the online world just at the right time. And so we rode that wave. You know, Santa Barbara had some unique circumstances that were in our favor with the daily newspaper's drama. And so, you know, if we were to start this in San Antonio, Texas, or you know, Des Moines, Iowa, I don't think we would have had the same good fortune. But because it was here, because I was known in the community, and because you know, Santa Barbara is really unique. And I know every community in the country says that, but Santa Barbara is really unique because, you know, we have original Presidio families still walking around, and we know who those people are. And so that insularity that we have is really, it speaks to the strength and character of our community. And if you understand how that works, it's a really great thing. And so we appreciate that. We understand how that works, and that really worked to our benefit because, you know, we're seen as an authentic local news organization. And the truth is, our competitors leave the door wide open, so we just keep running through it.
Right.
But we hit break even fairly quickly, and then we've been mostly profitable, modestly profitable, almost our entire existence. There were a couple of months in 2009 when I didn't think we were going to make it, but that you know, righted itself. And then over the last 2.5 years, we've really just been on this upward trajectory. And then 2020, you know, we've been blessed because despite everything that's been going on, we're actually having our best year for traffic, our best year for revenue, our best year for sales that we've ever had. So it's been, we can't really complain. Drama and inconvenience are always good for Newshawk.
Right. Well,
So.
and people are at home,
That's true.
and people are looking for news
Right.
and information. So that's interesting. Let's talk about the news business for a minute. The current environment that we're in, it's very polarized. There's an election coming. The cable networks tend to be, you know, on one side or the other. It's the news. Obviously, news has changed. But one is, I'd like kind of your thought on characterizing the business as a whole, and then kind of what you want to be in the midst of that.
So the whole point of Newshawk really was to fill the void of local news in Santa Barbara and Goleta and really all of Santa Barbara County. In this day and age, there are a lot of news deserts. Santa Barbara County is not technically a news desert because we have 2 daily newspapers, we have a couple of weekly newspapers, we have 2 television stations, network television stations, and we have Newshawk and some other organizations. But there are pockets, San Ynez Valley, Lompoc, Guadalupe, areas that don't have day-to-day coverage. And then we have, vertically, we have topic areas that are simply not being covered. Business is not covered well in Santa Barbara County, and yet on the South Coast, we have a really you know, active, thriving business economy in most years. So there's all kinds of things that need to be done in Santa Barbara County, and that's what our focus is. For the networks, for cable news, for newspapers, if it happens outside Santa Barbara County borders, we're just not interested.
Yeah.
Because if you're interested in the presidential election, there are a million websites out there that have much better sources. They're actually with the candidates, you know, in normal times. They're covering them on a day-to-day basis. They know what's happening. So why would you go to Newshawk to find out about that? You can the internet is full of those sources. But if you want to find out what's going on in Santa Barbara County, you have to go to Newshawk. There's only one source, and it's us. And so that's what we want to be. The news industry has been interesting. When I got my start, and in the early days when I was on the copy desk at the Houston Post, you know, we kind of would think that it would be our children's children that would not be reading newspapers anymore. And, you know, fast forward, not even 15 years, it wasn't our children's children, it was ourselves. I mean,
Right.
I stopped reading a daily newspaper when I left the daily here. And so my children grew up never actually seeing me pick up a paper product.
Right.
You know, I was reading it on my computer, and so that just completely changed, you know, almost overnight. And you know, at the time Newshawk started, I think the iPod had been around for maybe 5 or 6 years, and you know, now when you think of an iPod, you're thinking like, wow, that's old school. You know, who has those anymore?
Right.
So who knows what's going to happen 6 years from now? I
Right.
mean, you know, you're probably going to be reading a device that in direct sunlight, you know, on the beach with waves crashing about, and it's no big deal. I mean, who knows?
Right.
But we do know that local news is not very sexy. It's not. There's no. It's difficult to make a living at local news because it's a confined geographic area, probably a smaller population center. But for us, we think the possibilities are endless. It's an unlimited universe for us, and there's just so much for us to do.
Yeah.
I think Santa Barbara County, which has about 450,000 people in it, is probably at the top end of the ideal population center for us. I would never want to go to Los Angeles. That's just too big.
Yeah.
There's too much going on, but we can own Santa Barbara County, and that's what we're trying to do.
That's really interesting.
And I would also say that we, you know, having my failure experience with the South Coast Beacon, we don't look at ourselves as being in the news business. We're in the business of news, and we tell all of our employees that, you know, Newshawk has to be profitable for us to grow. We can't. This is not a hobby. We have to make it. So everybody in our organization understands that they have to be entrepreneurial, and even our reporters, you know, they can't sell ads, but they help us sell ads by being accurate, thorough, fair in their reporting and getting the story and telling the truth as best they can, and that helps our sales side, you know, run the business.
Right. And what is your team 10 people? Is it 8?
We have 13 full-time employees now, which
Wow.
in the beginning days I couldn't even imagine that.
Right.
But we've actually hired 2 people this summer, one a reporter and one on the sales side, because the workload has just been so great.
Wow.
We had planned to do that later in the fourth quarter, but we had to accelerate that just because it was exhausting.
Wow. So 2020 for your organization, it's focused more eyeballs on Newshawk. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, that's been one of the results.
It has, but really that's been the culmination of a process that in 2012 I took on 2 partners, Tom Bolton, who's our executive editor, and then Kim Clark, who is our business development vice president, and they now run their respective departments, and then and they're partners with me. We own 100% of the company, and then I work on the entrepreneurial side. And truthfully, I try to stay out of the way and
Yeah. Right.
you know, get to do stuff like this and
Yeah.
have lunch, but they do all the work. But once they came in and really started to focus on their things, and it wasn't just me doing everything, then the business really started to take off. It was immediate with news because Tom instituted, you know, we're heavy on breaking news, which is what people really need to know. If they hear a siren, they see smoke, they need to know right then, not 5 hours from now.
Right.
And so that really started to take off. And then Kim, we were doing pretty well, but it was just basically we were like locusts, and you know, there was no paperwork, and people would tell me stuff, and I'd make deals, and Kim brought some organization to that,
Yeah.
and enabled us to actually finally figure out, okay, what do we have, what do we don't have, what do we need, and how do we get it? So that really started to take off. And then in the summer of 2017, if you remember the Whittier fire, which burned Camp Whittier and Rancho Alegre up in the mountains, that's when Newshawk exploded. That was, I think, on a July, it was a Saturday in July, right around noon when that fire happened, and it was touch and go for Goleta for a long while. But our traffic just exploded. Then, of course, that fall was the Thomas fire, that December, And then, just less than 3 weeks after that, Montecito happened. And then, interestingly, the cave fire, which was last November, I think, it started up on 154.
Oh, yeah.
And that became our all-time biggest story.
Really?
That fire, which amazingly burned not a single home, but it happened in just such a compressed time period, and it was visible the entire time to the community. And so that really exploded Newshawk. And then the coronavirus hit in March, and then our traffic has just been sky high since then.
Wow.
And so
that November fire, I mean, my sense of that was it was because of what had just happened.
Yes.
I mean, wasn't that part of the dynamic?
Probably, and the fact that it was so visible from
visible.
The very start of it, you could almost see the flames within seconds of it starting, and then the wind was blowing.
Right.
Astonishingly, there were no injuries and no houses burned, and so but it evoked memories of the 1990 Painted Cave fire because it was essentially in the same area and threatening the same neighborhoods, and so that's still 30 years later still very fresh on people's minds.
Yeah. It's an interesting business that you guys are in. I mean, literally, so one day in July of whenever it was, you wake up like any other day, but for you guys, your life has changed. I mean, you can be thrust into a whole story world just like that any day. I mean, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
which around here seems like it happens a lot.
It does, and especially Montecito. I mean, Who knew this was such a sleepy little bedroom community? And my gosh, we have international disasters here on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But we're blessed with a really good team. We have a very experienced staff, and we do disasters really well. We've certainly had enough opportunity over the years, and but there's adrenaline. It's exciting. We feed on that, and the fact that we know that our readers, and we have constant feedback from our readers too, which is another cool thing about the internet. Every day is a conversation. Whereas in print, I could sell you a newspaper and you could read every word of it, or you could throw it in the trash and I would never know. But on Newshawk, we know exactly what people are doing, and they're telling us what they want to read every minute of every hour of every day.
Right.
And it's almost too much information. But within that data are trends and things that are really important to us because they're important to our community.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we connect with a lot of people.
Yeah. What's the most common way people get your news?
Through the email. So we have 2 daily emails, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and people a lot of times treat that as a newspaper.
Right.
And they'll email us and say, I missed the city council story. Well, it's sitting on our website, but they're looking at it it's not in their email from that day, so we didn't cover it, but we did. It was just the day before.
Right.
But that's the website is obviously the whole package, and people are coming to that 2, 3, 4 times a day generally. But the email is where people, we see it in our traffic analytics, the spikes when people are opening that. And so there's that. And then,
how do people sign up for that?
It's right there on our website, subscribe. And
just subscribe.
Right, and it's free. Comes at 4:15 a.m. It's amazing how many people know that it comes at 4:15 a.m. because they sleep with their phones by their bed, and it dings when the email comes in. And the only reason I did that was back when I got the Wall Street Journal delivered, it came religiously at 4:30 a.m. And so I figured, well, I'll just beat the Wall Street Journal. You can read Newshawk and then go out and get the paper and start your day. And so,
wow, so 4:15 in the morning and then the afternoon.
And then 4:15 p.m. We did that just because we figured that's about the time of day when people are starting to look for, they're watching the clock and they're thinking, what can I not do with my job? And so we can give them 45 minutes of stuff to goof off with, we'll do it.
Right, that's great. A couple of your involvements are interesting to me, and I was reading a little bit about this. the project you did, Prescription for Abuse, a 6-month NewsHawk team project which explored the misuse and abuse of prescription drugs in Santa Barbara County.
Right.
Can you tell us about that project and kind of what you learned?
That was a fascinating project. We were approached by the California Health Journalism Project, which is associated with the Annenberg School at USC, and they asked us to apply for a fellowship, and so we did, and we chose this topic just because we were getting a lot of, we were covering a lot of overdose deaths, and we had been tipped that there was a specific doctor in town who was overprescribing. Basically, you just tell him what you want and he would do it. And we couldn't really get anything on that, and so we felt like we needed some help, and we thought if we did this project with USC, with their resources, we could get some professional expertise to help us crack that case open. And so we, NewsHawk always bites off way more than we can chew. We're very ambitious, and that was definitely very ambitious, but we had it was led by our current managing editor, Gianna Magnoli, who was right out of school. Laura Cooper, who you may know, she's with Direct Relief. She's actually been involved with the Turner Foundation as a volunteer in the past. She lives on the west side. And a couple other folks, and they just dug into it. And what we found is that there was a lot of abuse, but the misuse was pervasive, in Santa Barbara County, just like it is anywhere else. That's not unique to us, but it brought home to us that this is a problem that affects every single family. Virtually everybody's been touched by it, and most of the time it starts innocently enough where there's an injury or something where those drugs are actually helping, but they're very addictive. And so it was just an awareness project. We've tried to go back and do something similar to do an update, because it's had its peaks and valleys since then, but it's on the upward trajectory again. And I know you had Joyce Dudley on here recently, and she was a huge help, and her office was a huge help in that project. And she was one of the ones who was able to put us in touch with the right people to explain the magnitude of it. Right. So
it's become a big problem.
It is, and I don't know what the solution is, because those drugs are actually very useful.
Right.
It's when they're abused or misused, that's when they become catastrophic.
That's interesting. You're a member of the Santa Barbara Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse's Fight Back Steering Committee. So you have a heart for people who are struggling with addiction.
Of course, yes, I would. That is true. I got involved with Fighting Back because that was our readers were really interested in that topic. Partly because of the Prescription for Abuse series that we did, but whenever we write about drug abuse or addiction issues, we get readership on that. And so I felt like if our readers are interested in that, then I can be a voice for their concerns and their issues in that organization. And so that's what I try to do. Same thing with Partners in Education. K-12 education is a huge topic for our readers. They devour that stuff. So if I can be involved and be a representative of them, I think that helps them, and it helps NewsHawk as we try to cover that issue, because we have a little bit more understanding of what we're facing. Right. And the Fighting Back does tremendous work. We're very involved, the organization's very involved with Cottage Health and the Bridge Clinic, which is a partnership with Cottage, Santa Barbara Neighborhood Clinics, and to people who are coming into the emergency rooms, rather than treat them, release them, and then hope that they'll come back. They can actually go directly, be walked across the street into the Bridge Clinic and start to get supportive services immediately, which is what so many of those people need. Right. So it's
powerful.
And this from the Turner Foundation, but it's such a profound need in our community. Yeah. This is the greatest place to live, and you would think, well, we're not touched by any of that, and yet we are. Right. And it's pervasive.
Right. And so many of those, I mean, we're talking about prescription drugs, and then the other, I mean, it can be silent, invisible. And that's one of the things about, I think, the prescription drug, the opioid thing, that you're right, starts as a solution, and then it's not a solution anymore, but it's invisible.
Right.
And so it's so hard to, and so many people are suffering invisibly, which is what I think is one of the sad parts of it.
It really is sad.
And then you've been involved with my alma mater, Westmont College.
I love Westmont.
Yeah, so do I.
I know that.
Are you on the? You're on a foundation. Are you on the foundation board? Or
Yes, the foundation board.
Oh, you are. Okay.
Yeah, they would never let me as a trustee.
No, I don't know. Well, the Gail Levy will be here soon, so I'll ask her about that. Well, that's great. Well, hey, it's wonderful to meet you in person, to hear what you're doing. It's fantastic. I'm a NewsHawk fan, and
well, thank you.
So thanks for all you do for the community.
Thank you, and thank you to the Turner Foundation, because that's been a real blessing in this community, and I know it's broader than Santa Barbara, but it's glad that you're here too.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see you next time. This is Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Thanks for joining us. Today we have a very special guest. Reverend Jim Stretchberry is on the program. He's had an amazing life. You'll hear about him from being born in France in 1947, incredible family story, 3 adopted children, amazing story, amazing experiences. You won't want to miss it. So stay with us. The Good Life is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. My guest today is Reverend Jim Stretchberry. Jim is a friend. He is kind of a legend, I would say, in Santa Barbara. He's had an incredible story, and I just want to welcome you, Jim.
Thank you, Dean. So happy to be here with you. After all this, we kind of had this planned for a few months.
We have. Things have been pretty interesting in the world.
They have.
So I'm glad to finally be here, socially distanced as we are. Let's start kind of, and I want to get into current events, and I want to talk a little bit about kind of the world and all that in a minute, but I thought maybe it would be helpful to start. I'm just interested in your life. As I was reading about you, you were born in France in 1947, spent 10 years in France, came to the States, went to Australia for 7 years, back to the States. So talk a little bit about your upbringing, just kind of what was that like? You were in boarding schools all over the place.
Well, Dean, it was kind of interesting for us, and now I'm at this age where I kind of play the videos of everything I can remember from my earliest memory to now, and it's kind of interesting how God really speaks to you in that. Yeah. But I think a lot about my life and where I've been and where I could have been, and it's really helpful for me when I minister to other people. But my mom was a Holocaust survivor, and my parents met in the French Resistance in the 1940s. And my mom was only 18 when Hitler invaded Poland. She was from Danzig, and she was just a freshman in the university and very idealistic and didn't see Hitler for what he was, even though some of her family did. Oh. But 90% of her family perished in the Holocaust. Oh my. And then my mom became an adult way before she should have been. She came from a very protective family, very influential family in Danzig. And so she was there in the resistance, and then met my father there, who had been shot down and found his way in the resistance. And they married, and they had children because they had children, not planned children. And so my mom recently told my wife, she said, she wished that they would have had a way not to have children at that time because life was so complicated. Oh. And I don't want to go into a lot of that, but life was complicated for my parents. They married and divorced each other 4 times. And for over many years. And my mother's very Jewish, so she only married one man. She never dated or was with anybody else. So 4 times they tried, but it just I think all the situations and the war made it very difficult.
Wow.
Fortunately, we had other people in our family on my mother's side that really was concerned about us, so we ended up going to boarding school pretty early. And we lived in France for 5 years, and then I went to Naples to a Sacred Heart College there. Okay. And then we went to Casablanca for a while when Casablanca opened up because it was a non-sectarian school. But we only stayed there 6 months because then the French-Moroccan War started, so then we're back to Italy. Wow. And then it was decided that we should try to come to the States. That was an interesting experience because I didn't speak English. I spoke French and Italian, so we got kind of beat up every day. So we went to Australia for the holidays where my grandparents had gone, and my grandfather, Arthur, could see how unhappy we were, so we ended up staying there. And I went to boarding school there and finished high school there and went to university there for a while.
In Australia.
And so, in Australia. So life was pretty complicated. You know, we weren't very close to each other, my brother and my sister and I, even though we are today. And we saw each other on occasion. My brother really objected to the Catholic school, and when he was in his early teens, he refused to go because of the Catholic Church's role in the Holocaust, or his presumed idea of their role. So he ended up going to a non-sectarian school in Australia, but in Geelong, another school. And my sister went there. So it made for an interesting life. I came back to the States in the mid-'60s, and of course I registered for the draft right away, thinking, you know, they'll never bother me, and I got drafted in 2 months. And so then I was in the Air Force, and you know, had some good experiences there. Spent 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, and that kind of did something to my personality for a while. And came home from there, finished school, got my degree here at UC, and then went on to decide what I was going to do with my life. I was very rudderless, you know. I had my passion was business and accounting, and I just wasn't kind of going anywhere. And then actually through David Winter, Dr. Winter from Westmont, we were on a board. I was really interested in special kids, so I volunteered at St. Vincent's, and we decided we needed to start a school for special ed kids that was non-religious, non-sectarian. So we started a school called Seton School, and David really encouraged me to change my vocation again, go back to school, and he said, you'll be perfect at this. So I began working there as the administrator and became the president eventually, and stayed there for 13 years until mainstreaming pretty much took most of the kids and put them back in public school. And as a result of that, God did wonderful things. We adopted 2 other children with special needs, and my wife has worked in that field for 35 years, so it was very complimentary for these kids because we know the system and we know a lot of the issues that are around them. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Wow. So let's back up for a second. So your mom, you mentioned she's 99 years old.
99 and a half.
99
Because now we're going by the months.
Right.
Just so
that counts. Let's count the half. So and she's here.
She's in San Francisco, in Marin County.
So
she was in Santa Barbara for 35 years.
Okay.
And then there's a program up there that some very prominent Jewish people in Chicago, there's a Holocaust survivors apartment program up there. And it's on a scaled, you know, scaled affordability things, and it's a beautiful place, beautiful apartments. So she has a very nice 1-bedroom apartment, and she's been there for 15 years now.
Wow. And your siblings, are they there?
My brother's there in the San Francisco area.
Okay.
And my sister's still in Australia. She never left.
Okay. Wow. So just in general, I mean, so you have strong memories of growing up in France? I mean, is that what is your earliest memory, I should say?
You know, many memories, some good, some very bad. My strongest memory as far as faith is concerned which is the most important thing to me now, is I remember going to Sacré-Cœur, this Sacred Heart school in Naples, and I wasn't 6 yet, and I didn't speak Italian, so that was already a challenge, but there was a nun there, Madre de Musée, I remember her name to this day, and she spoke French. She was from Paris, and so she came up to me, and for some reason, I was not a happy kid, and she came up and said, "Jimmy, God loves you. He sent Jesus for you. You don't know what that means today, but you will." Oh. And that incident has played into my life, my entire life. Wow. And then for some reason I saw some weird movie called Bread and Wine about this little orphan kid finding Jesus in the attic on a crucifix. They shaped me. I mean, they really affected my thinking. And then in later in life, in Catholic school, I was really interested in the church. I went to seminary for less than a year, and then thank God a priest who loved me said, "You don't want to do this. We weren't meant to do this." And I didn't. But then I slipped away pretty much from the church. But I never did from the Lord. I remember in Vietnam, I used to drink so much. I mean, it was just insane. I drank every day, probably a bottle of scotch every day. But then I got a promotion, and I remember laying in bed thinking, I'm going to get myself killed here, or I'm going to kill somebody else. So I didn't know what to do. And I hadn't drank before Vietnam. And so I got out of bed, got on my knees, and said, God, you're the only one that can free me from this.
Wow.
And never had another drink for another year and a half in Vietnam.
Wow.
So God has played a very instrumental role in my life many times.
I mean, so that was that kind of the moment where you felt like you surrendered?
No. So when I came home, I was pretty messed up, pretty intense PTSD, a lot of issues there. And, you know, I tell my wife these days, I said, you know, if I would have been married to you during this period of time, I would have never stayed married to you. So you're a saint. And because I was not good. You know, I married my wife in 1971. I was out of the service in 69, and I had some pretty bad years. And then in 1976, February 13th, a good friend of mine in Santa Barbara, some people might remember Southern Woods. They were the first wooden toilet seat people and the wooden medicine cabinets. I don't know if people remember that. A huge company. But he became a believer through his wife, who, that was my aha moment. And I remember him calling me on a Friday night, said, Stretch, I got to talk to you. So I said, okay, tomorrow. And we met downtown and had coffee. And he said, I found Jesus yesterday. And
That's what he said.
I laughed in his face. I was just like, okay, so what? And he never left me alone, you know. So finally, and it was kind of through the charismatic renewal time in '76. And so finally, there was nothing much happening in Santa Barbara in that sense. And then finally, I just decided, well, I'll go with him on a Friday night, and then I'll just shut him up. And even that night, God had, you know, in that night, I was going to go. I didn't want to go, but Rick and Kath made me go. But that day on Friday, Rick calls me and says, you can't go with us because we have to take these other people. So I said, fine, you know, and I was going to blow it off. And then it started torrentially raining in Santa Barbara, which is a rare occasion. And so I'm driving near Milpas Street, and I'm thinking, I don't need this. And I had some issues with driving anyway from Vietnam time. And I said, I don't want to do this. And I don't know, you know, it was just something in me drove me down there. And I got saved that night. First time that I would say I got saved.
Wow.
And
was that a church? Was it a church? Or
it was
or
just a renewal movement, people from all over the state,
Okay.
Catholics, Protestants, even Baptists.
Okay.
That's a joke.
Yeah, right. I have Baptist roots. So.
I know.
So let me back up again. So you've been a CEO, you've been an administrator, you've been in the service, and then you ended up pastoring at Calvary here in Santa Barbara for many years.
I did.
Tell us about that.
So what happened when mainstreaming, I wanted to stay in special ed. So when mainstreaming came to be, I didn't want to work for a bureaucracy. And I looked in Texas, actually, in Houston, and I looked in Michigan. And then Ricky Ryan was a pastor at Calvary, and he had taken this interest in me. Because I would probably say that my Christian life never kind of went to the next level until I got to Calvary Chapel.
Huh.
And
With Ricky.
It's the teaching or it's whatever. And Ricky took kind of an interest in me. And one day he took me to lunch and he said, do you ever think about going into ministry? And I laughed. You know, I was making like $150,000 in the 70s, you know. So I said, no, I'm good. And then he said, well, you should pray about that. So I did. And then I decided, well, you know, something in me kind of had an interest. So I came on as a missions coordinator. And then just more and more and more. And Ricky kept saying, well, you know, you're wonderful here. If you're in, you're in. If you're out, you're out. And more where he finally said, you're all in or you're all out. And so, it was difficult, you know, because the church was small and not, you know, financially capable of taking care of me. But fortunately, God had set it up so I'd saved a lot of money in my years at Seton School. So I was able to use those savings to basically take care of my family and move through until I was ordained and then kind of worked my way through. I was at Calvary for 13 years.
Yeah, right. Now let's talk about your adopted girls.
Sure.
So Sarah, Hannah, and Elizabeth, pretty biblical names. I have a Hannah, by the way. Elizabeth passed away when she was 2.5.
Yes.
And I'm interested in, obviously, you've had, I guess, 2 special needs, and you've done a lot of work in special needs, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But talk about the journey with Elizabeth, this adopted child who has some issues, and you walk through a road that ends in her passing. Tell us a little bit about that and how it affected your life.
Well, as I told you earlier, when we determined my wife couldn't have children, we didn't do anything for a while. I wish, I want to be honest about exactly the way things were. We didn't do anything for a while, but then we thought, we'd like to have a child. So we applied to Santa Barbara County Adoptions and went through the process and had a couple of actually very bad disappointments. But then Sarah came along, and it was really good. And then after we'd had Sarah for a few years, we decided it's not good to have a one-child family, so let's get a sibling. And then the people that were in our circle, which were a lot of special people, really encouraged us. And again, I wish I could say it was us, but it wasn't. They encouraged us to say, look, you're both very qualified in this field. You have training, you have degrees. Adopt a special kid. Nobody else wants to adopt them.
Right.
So we prayed about it, and God gave us peace, and we adopted Elizabeth from Queen of Angels in Los Angeles, and not realizing that she'd had these serious medical challenges at the time, but we were able to figure it out pretty fast. And so we did everything we could, to save her life, but that was not the Lord's plan. And I will confess, it was very difficult for me. Just because of my life, I have a hard time loving and really connecting with people, and Hannah was my heart, and Elizabeth was more of my heart, and Sarah is all my heart. So yeah. I'm sure you have kids, you understand.
Yeah.
So it was difficult when she passed, and it was a very hard process for her before she passed. And so for the next year, it was difficult for me. I left church altogether.
Really?
And I was a leader in our church. I left the church altogether and kind of did my own thing. Didn't really go back into a dark place, but was not interested in anything. I thought I did it all. Born Jewish, raised Catholic, a good Protestant. I'm good. So, but then about the next, I'll tell you exactly, the next November, I started to think, this is not good for my oldest daughter, Sarah. I don't like some of the people she's hanging around with, and not Christians. So again, we went back to church for her. And we picked 4 churches where we knew people, and Calvary was the first, and they were meeting at Pebble Hill. And I remember walking in there on Wednesday night, and Dean, I believe in the supernatural. But walking in there on Wednesday night, I had no interest to be there. I was on all these state boards in Sacramento. I had a great life. I was on the National ARC board. I had my life was great. I remember walking in there Wednesday night, and I don't think I'd listened to a message that much as I couldn't remember the last time.
Really?
And I was just captivated with his way to bring out the gospel.
Huh.
And I never stopped going. I canceled everything that I had on Sundays. I kind of got out of other obligations, and I felt that I really, really was committed. So those were the early years. Ricky had only been there about 10 months, and were the early years of Calvary.
Wow.
So I was able to be part of that whole insane growth pattern that happened.
Wow. And then Hannah came along.
And then we decided that we should have still another child, and and again we were thinking we'd just adopt a non-handicapped child, but then the influences that we had around us, and 100% the Lord had us adopt Hannah. And Hannah is, she makes me a better man every day. She's just a wonderful, wonderful young girl.
And is she in a home?
She lived with us for 25 years.
Okay.
And then we started doing some planning for her to have her own apartment. Okay. So we worked a deal with the state where we have her basically 2 days a week.
Okay.
And then they fund 5 days. And then so she has her own apartment, then she has her own staff. Because Hannah's kind of weird. She has mosaic Down syndrome, and she has some autistic traits, and she has very intensive OCD behaviors. Okay. So for her to live in community would be practically impossible and very difficult for her. So they would need to medicate her, and she's never been medicated.
That's tough. Yeah. Wow. And she's how old now?
37.
37. Wow.
No, 36.
36.
My other daughter's 38.
I want to talk a little bit about the American European Bethel Mission. And you've been in 93 countries. You've seen a lot. Obviously, we've heard about your upbringing. But let's start with, I want to kind of get your perspective a little bit more on the world and different things. But tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing with most of your time.
Well, after I'd spent this time in Calvary, things were changing. Whit Merrick went to Summer with Carpinteria, studied reality, and I told Ricky I felt I wanted to make a change. I put in my time, but I wasn't going to make it unless he blessed it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wouldn't be there if it wasn't for him. So I had a few things. I had an opportunity in London. I had an opportunity in Melbourne, Australia, and he discouraged me in both those things. And I was on the board of American European Bethel Mission in Santa Barbara. It's the oldest Jewish outreach in the world. Started in Odessa, Russia.
Really?
And a huge story. Could be another time.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things. And the director, I think that actually your mother knew her, Vera Kushner, took me to lunch one day and said, "The Lord's been speaking to me, and he told me you should become the pastor of this ministry." And I'm just another one of those things. I looked right in her face and said, "You are crazy." They had $1 million of debt. It was just terrible.
My.
It was, she had been trying to keep it going for many years. And I said, not a chance. And not even praying or thinking, just said, not a chance. But then I talked to Ricky about it, and he wasn't laughing. And he said, "You don't know what the Lord's doing. You would think you would have learned it by now. So you need to pray about this." And I will. So 2 weeks later we met, and he said, "You need to take this job, because if anybody can change this, you can."
Wow.
And I did it based totally on faith and where Ricky had spoken into my life, and really believing that the Lord was taking me in that direction. And it was a tough 10 years, the first 10 years.
First 10 years are always the hardest.
And just changing everything, but it was good. And so then we've kind of fixed the ministry, and we have a huge piece of property in Haifa, which was David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, invited Leon Rosenberg to come to Israel to open an orphanage for Holocaust survivors' children.
Oh, really?
Because he had a lot of notoriety for having an orphanage in Poland, in Lodz, Poland, for Jewish children who had been part of pogroms.
Huh.
And so they had 267 kids in that orphanage who all perished in the Holocaust. And so he was in the States at Wheaton College in 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland. His wife and family was stuck there, and he was stuck here for the whole war. And that's a whole other story, actually, another show. So I came, and I had great support around me. We have our board, the original board that I put in place is the same board I have today, 20 years later.
Wow.
They're all there. And so that's a real blessing. And we've now added some younger board members like your age to make sure that we have a continuum and leave a legacy. And it's been a great experience. In Israel, we have wonderful work going on there. In Haifa, we've rebuilt that property so that we use half the property for hostels, but we only charge $25 a day. And so people come from all over the world. So that's a good income situation for us. And then on the other side, we have a 12-bed recovery program. We call it a discipleship program, and it's for people that we find on the streets in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Haifa. And they're either drug addicts, homeless, alcoholics, or whatever their situation is. And we try to get 12 all the time from that.
Wow.
And then they can come to our program, and they can be there as long as they need to be there. We take care of all their expenses, all their legal problems, medical problems, help them get back into society, reconcile with their families. So we've had about 200 men there since we did this. It's been about 7 years now.
Wow.
And so that's been really wonderful.
That's amazing.
And then in Germany, we have a great ministry there with a majority of young people.
And this is all based here.
It's the headquarters is here. And so what I did a few years ago, just to create more interest in the leadership in these different countries and also free us up from some development, is I formed a board in Israel, Ukraine, and Germany in those countries. Okay. And AEBM still has, Bethel Mission still has a super majority on those boards because we own the properties there. But then this allows their leadership to have a lot more ownership in those ministries. And so Germany has if it was any better, I'd cry.
Wow.
And Israel is the same thing, because we've empowered the people that God has brought us in Israel, Germany, and the Ukraine to do the ministry.
Right.
And then now we have oversight, and we still supply them with a pretty, decent amount of money every year. But they've become a lot more. They own it, and they've, in Israel alone, he probably raises 100,000 of his own money.
Okay.
In Germany, probably €1 million.
Wow.
So it's pretty fantastic.
And so, what is you travel a lot?
I'm the pastor for the different ministries,
Okay.
and I'm also vice chair of those boards.
Okay.
And so, and I travel there quite a lot. I teach quite a lot. In Israel, for example, we have 21 partnerships. So my feeling is, missiology has been my interest all my life. Even when I was in boarding school, I've always been interested in missions. When I went to a Catholic seminary, that's what I wanted to do, was be a missionary priest. And I studied under Ralph Winter at the U.S. Center for World Missions, and have kind of my understanding of missions, but it's been good. So I've never wanted to duplicate services. And so I shut down a lot of things we were doing in different ministries we had, and just found other ministries that were doing exactly the same thing, and decided, how can we come alongside each other and support each other
together.
So I preach at a lot of those churches around Israel and in Germany and the Ukraine and pretty much all over the United States, communicating what's going on, support, and also bringing the Word of God.
Wow, that's wonderful. And the recovery center is in where?
Haifa.
Okay, Haifa.
In
Yeah.
Haifa, yeah.
There's a lot of unrest right now in the country, if you haven't noticed. And there's, we have a pandemic, and then we have an economic downturn, and then we have the George Floyd incident, and unrest in the country, anger, legitimate anger. Obviously, it feels to me like a scab has been picked off at some level of this didn't just pop up overnight, but we're seeing something significant and deep that has been sparked by the George Floyd horrific incident. What are your thoughts on this, and how can we be peacemakers while listening and empathizing and not minimizing the feelings and legitimate anger and hurt that exists in a lot of these communities? What would be your words? You're an elder statesman at some level. I really was interested in hearing your thoughts on this.
It's a complicated issue. The pandemic is a complicated issue. It's hard to really. I'm a news junkie. I read 12 newspapers before I get out of bed in the morning, from Germany, France, England, and the States and Australia. And it's hard to know what to believe. And I'm a data person, and I'm a researcher, and it's hard to really know who am I going to believe. And it's not that people are telling outright lies, is that people are being very selective in what they're communicating, and you don't get the rest of the story, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
And so it's problematic. But I think the way the church has stepped up for the pandemic is notable. And it's worthy of great acclamation, because I think the church has really stepped up, especially to help people with food, single parents, and the elderly. And I think it's been very notable for me. I think this new issue it's an interesting issue for me, because I didn't grow up with the black issue. When I was in Vietnam, the black guys were my friends,
Right.
and I wanted those black guys in my unit because they were tough soldiers. And so I never understood the whole black-white thing, American thing. And I have, since then, I have a lot of black friends. Jesus came for all people.
Yeah.
He came to set all people free. And I think anybody that would take an opposing position to that would really need to be questioned in what their faith values are.
Yeah.
I think it's a terrible thing. It's been going on in this country for far too long. But I think as I study it, and as a pastor, this is what I would say. Will this stop because of this? No, because as I told a good pastor friend of mine the other day, for this to stop, it would be like saying sin will stop. And sin will not stop till the return of our Savior. And the thing is, I don't think this will stop.
Right.
But I think this is a great opportunity to wake up and see there is a problem here. There is a real serious concern here. I mean, I think what was done to this fellow is criminal.
Yeah.
And I think that he should suffer the full consequences
Yeah.
for doing that. But you know, I've been involved with the police for many, many years. I'm on the police board.
Yeah, you're
I'm
a chaplain, right?
Yes, I'm a sheriff's chaplain.
Sheriff's chaplain.
But I'm on the Santa Barbara Police Foundation board. I was one of the founders of the PAL program in Santa Barbara. I'm very involved with the police. They do a fabulous job.
Right.
They just do. I mean, they do a fabulous job. and what it is, for example, the demonstration we had in Santa Barbara on Sunday, it was peaceful and it was good. But I will tell you, if somebody would bother to unpack that, it was the way it was primarily because of the police. They blocked the streets. They brought in all their staff. I went to those briefings, and you know what they were is to be as accommodating as possible. I mean, it's America. You know, peaceful demonstration
Right.
is what we're all about.
Right.
But the key word here is peaceful.
Right.
And so they did everything in their power, including paying a lot of overtime, a lot of extra people, a lot of sheriffs there, highway patrol there, to keep people safe.
Right.
And that's what they do, you
Yeah.
know. And I think we need to, you know, we can't dismiss this terrible thing that's happening to people that are being marginalized. This is not right.
Right.
It's not right for our country, but it's not right especially for us as believers. But
Right.
on the other hand, we can't demonize the very people that are trying to protect us.
Right.
And what I'm very scared of about that, if this is America, and I know why I'm here, why I live here, and what this country stands for,
Yeah.
if we don't have them, what we could easily have is vigilantes. And you know, I think about that. If somebody's not protecting my family, I'm going to protect my family.
Right.
And so is anybody else.
Right.
And I shouldn't be protecting my family
Right.
because I may overreact or
Right.
do something. So
Right.
it's a very, very, there's a good side, there's a terrible side, there's terrible loss of life, there's damage, some of this really crazy things that are happening. But it's something that, just like the Rodney King events, it woke us up. It was a wake-up call.
Right.
You know, we need
Yeah.
to do something.
For sure, it was. One final thing. If you're speaking to a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid, young person, right now, and after you've experienced a lot in your life and business, 93 countries, lived all over the world, ministry, you've seen a lot. What one or two things would you say to a young person who's entering this crazy world right now that we're living in? What kind of words of advice or thoughts would you give them as they start out?
Well, I just spent, you know, some time yesterday with a close friend's son, and we kind of talked this through for a few hours. But it's, you know, it's a lot of it is ignorance. You know, you just, I mean, if you, you know, when you get in your car, you don't just throw the book in the glove box and get in the car and drive off. And if you do, it's going to be a curve for you to learn how to operate this vehicle. It's the same thing. I mean, people, I told this young fellow, you need to be informed. Do your homework. Do your homework to know why you feel the way you are. If you don't, those people that were leading that demonstration, you're going to do what they tell you. You're going to believe what they say. You're going to react to anybody unless you do your own homework. You need to find your own idea and your own piece about what it is that's going on and why it is going on. And you'll see you can really make a difference. But I think if you just react emotionally,
Right.
then not much will come from that.
Right, that's good. Well, thank you. What a life.
Yeah.
What a life. The
What a
great
pleasure,
Jim
Dean. Pleasure to know
Stretchberry.
you. Love what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to be together, and we appreciate taking the time to tell your story. We could have gone a lot longer, but
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Thank you very much for doing
Yes,
that.
thank you.
We'll see you next time.